And now I'm going to invite up to the stage some more of our stakeholder committee members. If we could have Philip Carroll, Chair of IBEC Meat Industry Ireland, Thomas Duffy, former President of Macra and Feirme, Pat McCormack, President of the ICMSA, Dolores O'Riordan, Director, UCD, Institute for Food and Health 2030. So if you could all come and take the stage, please. So we have Philip, Thomas, Pat and Dolores. Thank you all very much for joining us. Again, it will be the same format as the last discussion, an equal amount of speaking time and the same questions to each of you. So Philip, from a Meat Industry Ireland point of view, what, from your perspective, is the potential in delivering Food Vision 2030?
Thank you and good morning. Well, I suppose the first thing is to say that this is a plan that was developed by the industry. So we all have a stake in making it work. It is a great vehicle through which we can track the activities that we've decided upon and the actions we need to take. We also have the structures in place, which is very important as well. And two of the particular structures, one of which I'm involved in myself, is the beef and lamb vision group. There's also a dairy vision group. And so we're actively discussing one of the key elements of the Food Vision report, which is the sustainability piece. And it's an area, I think, where we're beginning to see the real impact that we can have in terms of driving down the emissions and meeting government targets. And I think, that's the biggest issue that we face as a sector, and we acknowledge that and accept that. I think, and I acknowledge what Laura said earlier, but we have a relatively good story to tell by comparison with many other countries in this space that are significant agriculture producers. And we do have a low carbon footprint relative to many of those competitor countries that we're working with. We know and we can do much better, and we have to do much better. And as Laura pointed out, she's fed up listening to people talking about next year and the year after. Now is the time. We have to act now. I think we recognize that as an industry, and I've seen that in the discussions we've had up to now. The things that we can do better are around the MAC. We need to really fully embrace the MAC measures right across all of the farm structures around the country. One of the big problems you have is that you need to deliver that on all farms. And that is a big challenge. And it's not the same challenge that's faced by other sectors. But nonetheless, it can be done because it has already been done in many areas in the past, and it can be achieved in the future. From our sectoral perspective, we also need to do better in talking about what our achievements are, by communicating better with the public on what we are doing and have been doing over many years. One example, for example, is in terms of finishing age of cattle. We've seen this over the last number of years, and one of the objectives in the Climate Action Plan is to reduce the average age of finishing from 27 to 24 months by 2030. That started way back in 2010, when the average age was 30 months. It's now 26 months. So we're actually on that journey over a fairly prolonged period and have been very successful in doing that. One of the other areas that I think is important for our sector and the dairy sector is that we should look at both of them as an integrated sector, an integrated livestock or bovine sector, who can do more by working together. And one large proportion of the raw material base for our sector comes from the dairy sector. It's about 60%. And we need to do more to commercialize that, to improve the quality of breeding around that, and introduce an integrated dairy beef program, which captures all of the critical and vital elements needed for success, which is genotyping, it's sex semen, it's dairy beef index. All of those elements need to be pulled together in a program consistent with getting a strong, sustainable, and commercial output from that sector. One of the things I find that's a little bit unhelpful in the narrative is that there's a kind of a discussion about output restrictions, reducing the national herd, the so-called national herd. That's not helpful in circumstances where I believe farmers are absolutely committed to the process that we've set out on. And I think we need to tone that down a little bit for the time being. And let's prove our credentials through all of the measures, the adoption of measures at farm level that are critical to this. If we can prove that we're capable of doing that, then we don't need to start looking at reducing the impact of farming in rural areas, which is a vital component of the rural economy.
If we can reach targets without doing that, if we can reach 25%.
And I think that's the important thing.
Okay.
Can I just mention one other area? And it's around, who does what and who is responsible for what. And I think we have to be very clear that the burden of this, while much of it falls at farm level, cannot be solely the responsibility of the farming sector. And that cost needs to be shared across the board. And there are very significant elements that require investment to deliver this. And we need to see where that investment is going to come from. And principally, that's got to come from government. In other areas, there are issues around, for example, on the business side. There are business competitive issues that we think are important that need to be addressed. And many of them, in fairness, have been addressed in the Food Vision report itself. Okay. But we need a structure to enable us to drive those forward. And I was touched on earlier around energy costs being a new example of where we need to start looking at how we can assist sectors to continue to compete internationally.
Great. Thank you very much, Philip. Thomas, I'm going to come to you now. And Philip talked about the burden falling primarily on the farmer. The burden really is falling primarily on the younger farmer, and the impact in particular will be felt most by the younger farmer. And you're in your minority, the minority in Ireland at the moment. So from the perspective, speaking as the voice of a generation, Thomas, from your perspective, what's the potential of Food Vision 2030?
I wouldn't dare speak for an entire generation. However, the outlook is very poor. We have to be very clear about this. I'm picking up on some of the things that Laura mentioned in terms of trends going in the wrong direction. We have two problems for young farmers. The first is that not only are trends going in the wrong direction, but they're actually not being properly measured. I know Tim referenced the average age being about 57. In Ireland, that's our best guess at the moment, because the figures that we have to work on are EU figures, which are from 2016, which showed that there was more over the age of 60 than under the age of 30. That is startling. The fact that the European Commission initiated an entire new cap without actually assessing the success of the previous one, without us knowing where we are in terms of that. So not only do we know we're in a negative place, but we don't know the actual direction of our trends. And very few countries have managed to implement measures which have bucked those trends, but some countries have managed to do that. Some countries have had success in implementing new ones. So if I was to say about the priorities of achieving the food vision, we have a very clear end goal, which is this concept of a more sustainable food system. And there's been a lot of discussion around environmental, there's been a lot of discussion about economic, and rightfully so. There's also discussion about social, but the reality is, and to harken back maybe to the first presentation, we're talking about synergies. We will not achieve the drastic changes that are needed in the agricultural food system if we do not have more young farmers in the sector. That isn't to say that older farmers or farmers in their 60s and that are not going to implement some of these changes. I have no doubt that some will, but we know the reality is it's not a healthy sector. You wouldn't be liking to go into a hospital where every single doctor is over the age of 65 or the average is over 65, which is the reality for farming at the moment. And this is very, very key. If we want to get practice change, we need to get young, educated, and one upside, and I suppose one assessment that we do have, Ireland is the top in the EU for the percentage of educated young farmers. We're matching with France, but we're top in the EU. So we have a huge body of young people, well educated and interested in coming into agriculture. So the question then is, why are they not getting into agriculture? What are the hurdles? What are the obstacles? And the problem fundamentally that Food Vision needs to address in concrete actions, and this is a mixture of market approaches, this is a mixture, but very heavily, of public approaches is overcoming a couple of these key barriers. And the first key barrier is access to land. That is very clearly a massive issue. Young farmers are priced out of the market at the moment. It's a massive struggle for us to do so. Access to credit. It was mentioned there about SMEs and diversification. Well, young farmers have consistently, and this has never been appropriately addressed with financial instruments, either by the state or by private banks. There's been some very minor moves around access to credit, but in reality it's simply not achieved enough. We have had very successful private initiatives with, like the Macra Land Mobility Service, which has addressed some of those land access, but it really needs to be broadened out. And the reality is there's a crush here between low market prices and a lack of public support. And it does vary by industry sector, which is, again, the challenge. And Laura mentioned about the success that we've had in the ammonia. If you look at the National Farm Survey, which does an assessment now on an index scale, so not an exact one, of the percentage, we see a very clear divide between dairy and the dry stock sector and tillage. Dairy is the youngest sector because they see the most potential for private returns. They see the most potential for growth and expansion. And as we deal with this stabilisation and the reduction of methane, that will be an advantage and that measures will be taken up. But also it'll be a major challenge if we talk about limiting output from that sector and limiting growth in that sector. Because what are we going to do then? Are we going to essentially condemn young farmers to not have access to conversion or not have access to expansion or growth? And we're not talking about going from 400 cows to 1,000 cows here. A lot of young farmers are going back and they're going from 50, 60 cows maybe to the national average at 100, 110. So we need to balance those two approaches the entire time. And I do want to mention as well, I mean, one of the most drastic low entrance levels is in the horticulture sector, which is one that we hear an awful lot about prioritising, and it's actually laid out that we need to prioritise the horticulture sector. However, this is going to be a massive challenge because there are simply not young people entering into that sector. And the final thing I will say is, and not to be glib about it or make a comment about Ukraine, but there's a saying that no plan survives contact with the enemy. In a very literal sense, this plan has now, reality, Europe is at war. We've focused on that a lot. But the reality is the enemies of a food system are numerous. There are different competitions for that. And I have to say, one of the first tests of this strategy was in the CAP reform. And it is very disappointing that Ireland is one of only 3 member states that decided to assign the bare minimum percentage to young farmers, and the only member state not to have installation aid.
Great, okay. Thank you very much, Thomas. Pat, I could see you nodding away as Thomas was speaking. From your point of view, the ICMSA, what's the potential in delivering Food Vision 2030?
In my defence, no, I wasn't falling asleep listening to Thomas. I was agreeing with him.
It was an agreement.
With him on a lot of things. Look, there's a huge potential out there. I suppose when I look at the screen there, I'm obviously in the minority because I believe we are already in a very, very sustainable place, having been in the marketplace at the coal face of it in the UK, Germany, and indeed in recent times in North America, where the Kerrygold brand is selling. One would be heartened when they'd go in and give a period of time in the supermarket there and see the consumer come in and put the Kerrygold brand in their tray. The reasons being, I suppose, is that they believe in what's being promoted out there, which is a very, very green image with white, a very pure white, healthy dairy product that ultimately arrives on the shelves in foreign fields. I believe, though, that the consumer is looking for more, and there is a challenge out there for us to be able to back up what we believe as an Irish dairy and indeed beef industry, that we are right up there, being one of the most sustainable globally. It was mentioned earlier about the SDS and the beef and lamb audits that take place on an 18-month basis around the country. That's unique, and I suppose it's trying to be copied by our European counterparts around the globe, and I suppose it gives us a handle on where we are and where improvements can be made. But being involved in the Vision Group and sitting on the dairy group and indeed the beef and lamb group, I am confident that we can deliver without a chop to the national herd. ICBF wasn't mentioned here today, and I think there's huge potential for genetic gain in the years ahead. Different to Thomas, I remember farming during the quota regime, and you were always breeding for protein and keeping the brake on butterfat because there was a butterfat adjustment during the quota era. We saw the butterfats rise substantially with the abolition of quotas because there was no longer a volume penalty. Equally, I think into the future, with proper incentives in place, we can see a genetic herd with potential to reduce emissions while holding our numbers. You know, also the Tagus Met curve was mentioned there this morning, and low emission slurry spreading has had a huge impact on farms. You know, that's going to be rolled out to a wider cohort of farms in 2023 and indeed 2024 and beyond. So hopefully over a period of time that benefit can deliver, and Laura will be able to see that in the years ahead. You know, I suppose when we touch on water quality, and water quality is a challenge, and I fully accept the trend is going in the wrong direction. And we as a dairy industry and as an agricultural industry have a part to play. But that's what we have, is a part. And if the other stakeholders that, you know, are responsible don't improve their house and get their house in order, it will be very, very hard for agriculture to deliver on that alone.
One thing, and I put it to Tim and I'll put it to you as well, that Laura mentioned, is that from her point of view, compliance is the biggest issue. What would you have to say about that?
Look, it certainly is, and you know, for the 99.99% of farmers that are compliant, it's extremely frustrating. That's the answer I would have to that. You know, there's an obligation on all of us, and there's an obligation on the department to provide funding under the TAM scheme for farmers who may find themselves slightly tight on slurry storage, for example, or indeed soil water in the months and years ahead. You know, I suppose there is no place for breaking the law, and whether that's a road traffic offence or an agricultural offence, there is no place. Everybody else pays the price. But, you know, going back to the good work, and, you know, if you go back, this isn't a story that has started out today. If you go back to my early times in farm politics, certainly, you know, there was an overhang from the farm waste management scheme where farmers found that in 08, in 09 in particular, they came under pressure from a price drop perspective. There was huge financial pain at that time because farmers had invested substantially in the previous decade in farm waste management. And, you know, that investment is ongoing, and, you know, it will continue hopefully into the future, and it's critical that it does in order to remain right up there at the top. But, you know, there is huge resources needed in science. You know, Tim, I think, was alluded to earlier, the ruminant additive. That can deliver substantially as well, and in particular during the winter period and indeed the finishing period for the animal for beef production. And, you know, to follow on what Philip was saying there is huge opportunity out there to build bridges in the sector, dairy and beef. You know, there is a dairy calf to beef scheme there, but it's probably nowhere near the adequate level of funding that's required. And, you know, hopefully we'll see a meaningful scheme in place that will reward farmers for the dairy beef production. Remembering that 57% of our output from a beef perspective originates in the national herd, I think there's huge potential there. You know, I suppose since the Food Vision Group, you know, concluded its business, the landscape has changed somewhat. And, you know, speaking to European politicians, and that food security is a huge issue now. And, you know, it was mentioned by the first speaker today, Lawrence, that it's a global issue, climate change. We are probably one of the most efficient that's out there globally. And I think, you know, anything that would curb our ability to produce food in the months and years ahead would be detrimental. Detrimental not alone to Ireland and the rural economy, which, you know, has 170,000, in excess of 170,000 direct employees. You know, I suppose we need the three stools of the sustainability. It's absolutely critical that we have economic sustainability in order to deliver environmental and socially.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Pat. Dolores, I'm going to come to you, Director at UCD of the Institute for Food and Health. And Pat touched on how important food security is, but as Tom said earlier on, it's not just food security anymore, it's food and nutrition security. So from your point of view, what is the potential in delivering food to 2030, and what potential can it have on our food and nutrition security?
Okay, I might just start with the overall strategy and the vision for Ireland to be a global leader in sustainable food systems. I think you've already heard from Tom what the benefits of that might be. So I would like to focus more on the implementation aspect of it. So I think it's a wonderful ambition to have. I certainly feel very proud to hear Taoiseach of the country speaking to having the sustainable global food systems. However, the implementation is extremely challenging. You're not just trying to align all of the stakeholders along the food chain in a linear fashion. You're trying to do it in a circular manner and have all of the parts interacting with each other. That is not an easy thing to do, let alone to do it at a national level. Embracing the ambition of the strategy, UCD has set up this network in conjunction with 4 other universities in the north of Ireland, in the south of Ireland, with leadership from Teagasc, with leadership from AFBI. And the network is called Food Eye. And it's trying to map out what framework would we need as a country in order to deliver on the vision. We've identified some gaps, and there's significant gaps in the data. So can we deliver on the vision? My concern at the moment is I don't know how we would measure it. How do we know whether we're successful or not? So we're back to the 3-legged stool. It's not as simple as the environment. It's not as simple as the economics. You have to have the societal build, the health bit of it, built into the metric to measure as to whether we truly have a sustainable food system. So there's a key challenge, and we will need investment in order to generate the data to say whether we have a sustainable food system or not. I think we're very fortunate. I think we will have a very good test bed as an island nation, and with a lot of strength in the agri-food sector. We have a particularly good strength in our research community. So the metric of research output is measured globally, and Ireland in one of those metrics ranks at 60% above the world average in terms of our scientific output performance. So we have the knowledge base, so that's a wonderful platform to be starting on, but we will need further investment if we are to deliver the framework. As part of Food Eye, in looking at where the gaps are, one of the things that has come through is on the plant side, on the plant technology. And it was interesting to see Lawrence's presentation this morning where he was picking out the legume and the plant bit as to where Ireland has a deficit. So we have done a deep dive on the data. So that is an area where we will have to have more focus if we are to realise the vision. Certainly from a food and health point of view, there is increasing evidence to show the link between a good diet and the quality of our health. And again, Lawrence showed some staggering figures as to 5 main causes of having a poor quality of life coming from diet. There's certainly an increased awareness from a consumer point of view. So to me, Mission 3 is critical that we are producing foods that are healthy, but that are appealing to the consumers and that the consumers trust. So the consumer is believing in what the food industry is producing and that the food is good for them. So you see, particularly post-COVID, people began to recognize more the impact, for example, of diet on their immune system, and you know, everybody became an immunologist over the past 2 years, but it has increased that awareness between diet and health. We're seeing increased demand for foods that have good digestive health. And I suppose a big driver of food and health is our demographics. We have an aging society, and people are no longer happy to live longer. They want a longer life with a good quality of life. So there is a big opportunity for foods with health benefits, particularly for that aging society, as well as the other areas that I mentioned. So I see big opportunity for us to become a leader in that area, in producing food that is sustainable, but also healthy. And back to the point, we export the vast majority of our food, so we do need to look to the global market. So I think that's a bright future for us. I think particularly in terms of how our dairy products are produced. We've heard the nature of the production systems. So just 10% of the global milk supply comes from grass. So I think Ireland can have a big differentiator in terms of how we produce our dairy products. And we all like to think when you look out of the green fields that the cows are looking very happy and it's local, it's natural, it's healthy. It's a nice story, but we really don't have the evidence from a health point of view to say that grass-fed dairy products is more healthy for us if we are to benchmark it against our global competitors. So again, it's an opportunity, but an opportunity we can only realise if we invest in it.
And measuring.
Measuring.
Okay.
You have to measure it. You have to have the data. You have to have the evidence. And I think to do that and to realise that we do have an opportunity, I think it comes to Mission 4, where we are looking to have a very innovative agri-food sector. In the mission, we say we want it underpinned by talent and we want it underpinned by technology. And I think in order to capitalise on what we have in Ireland, I've already spoken to the strong scientific credentials we have in agri-food. We also have it in the digital sector. So there is an opportunity to marry those together and ensure that we have a very dynamic, reactive agri-food system that will be sustainable and that will deliver healthy foods for the future.
Okay, thank you very much, Dolores. And I'd like to thank all of our panel of stakeholder committee members, Philip, Thomas, Pat and Dolores. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Helen.
Now we're going to go to the results of our first Slido poll, and unless things have changed drastically in the meantime, I think the results were pretty obvious. The question we asked was, do you think the Irish agri-food sector can achieve its ambition to become a world leader in sustainable food systems in the next 10 years? And 59% of you thought yes, 32% thought no, and 9% of you thought it already is. So that's great, thank you very much. We have a second poll question to ask you, and we will read the results of that poll question out after our morning break. So question number 2, what is the most important mission in Food Vision 2030? Is it Mission 1, a climate smart, environmentally sustainable agri-food sector? Mission 2, viable and resilient primary producers with enhanced well-being? Mission 3, food which is safe, nutritious and appealing, trusted and valued at home and abroad. Mission 4, an innovative, competitive and resilient agri-food sector driven by technology and talent, or is it all of the above? So if you want to start voting,